So this is going to be another video about sort of breaking an idea for my movie I'm going to shoot at the end of the year. I have another video, I'll link it below, but it's going to be found footage, mostly improvised, just a couple actors in the woods. We're going to figure it out. So this time I want to talk about some sort of like story logic stuff that's going to affect the sort of the production of it. If you ask for a shark, do you need a shark? Do you need a remote control shark? That kind of thing. No sharks in this one, obviously, but it's gonna be found footage. So the idea is the actors are going to be holding cameras, which is what the last episode was about. And I think I'm in a good place with that idea, but it's also going to be a situation where it's I sort of like at the end of the episode realized, do I want to have a situation where it's entirely found footage like Cloverfield, where you're literally seeing the tape as it was recorded, or do I want to sort of do a more cinematic thing? Because I was thinking more like like a Blumhouse movie where there's a lot of big wides in the night where it's implied to be like the bad guy or the monster's point of view watching them. The image in my mind is it's night, it's a super wide shot, you can just see the tent and the lights in the tent and just the barren wasteland or the barren rest of the world that really hones in on how isolated they are. That was kind of the image that sort of got me thinking about that. But so that's the push and pull, because like for practical reasons it would be easy just to have the actors record everything in camera and that be what it is, and try to cut the cameras together enough to make a story in the edit. But I do feel like if I'm going to make a feature film, that one aspect of it is I want to be able to demonstrate like my visual storytelling ability, not necessarily just the fact that I handed cameras to actors. I feel like I'd be shooting myself in the foot if I didn't have the sort of feature film storytelling shots that would make sense in a horror film. So that's the push and pull. Is do I want to just have it be found footage, or do I want it to actually be sort of like half found footage, half the like organic story shot traditionally, that kind of thing. So first thing is on the side of just using the actors using the cameras is you're limited by, at least for the edit, where the actors put the cameras and whether the cameras were recording. That's both a practical problem, but it's also a narrative problem, because if the actors aren't thinking like filmmakers, or if their actors aren't, basically, I feel like I'd be missing. I'd have to jump in and interrupt the scene and be like, make sure you put a camera here, or we're gonna put a GoPro over here in case this like that. I feel like that interferes with the organicness, but it also I don't know how I feel about that versus have a list of stuff that I know the actors are gonna get what they're gonna get, and it's gonna be kind of the same vibe every time, because it's going to be these little cameras, and at the risk of that getting stale, I feel like Cloverfield, it didn't get stale because it was a constantly evolving story, whereas this, I feel like it's going to run out of freshness once we're in the third scene where it's a couple of actors dealing with something using the same cameras and the same shots, and there's no variation. And so that's why I'm thinking it's worth having, the at the beginning of the story in every horror movie, you have the tracking shot overhead of the vehicle on their way, into wherever they're going, following them on the highway way up overhead. Also just traditional storytelling shots like presenting new info or information that the characters will be exposed to later, but the audience is exposed to ahead of time, kind of the killer behind you kind of situation. All that kind of stuff I feel like serves really well to be shot cinematically, whereas it's at best a dice roll that they're going to get it in camera themselves, without a ton of choreography. So I feel like maybe now that I say it out loud, maybe I'm saving myself a lot of trouble by just having a bunch of shots in my list that I'm going to take care of that are not going to be responsible on the actors. The actors not going to be responsible for. That way I have the skeleton of an edit, and I can supplement it with, the really gritty, really authentic point of view stuff. And that's the other thing is, I really do appreciate, especially in horror, the killer point of view, seeing them outside, the voyeuristic thing, the creepy stuff, specifically that they think they're being watched, but they don't know they're being watched, but we know they're being watched, like that kind of stuff. It Follows comes to mind as a touch point, or You're Next is another one where you get a lot of like the bad guys looking in before anything really goes down. You can see where I'm sort of chewing the idea there. Logically, I think we're up against two ideas. If it's all actors using the found footage versus adding some cinematic panache, whatever to it. On the actors only side, you're purporting that it's real. It's the fact that it's found footage is saying, hey, this is real. I'm calling attention to the fact that this is real, blah, 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 which worked really well for Cloverfield, worked really well for Blair Witch. But again, I'm just not sure if it's going to get too stale too quick to have actors doing this without really choreographing the actor thing. And then if I'm going to go through the trouble of choreographing the actor thing, I might as well make them live streamers and make it live and make it literally choreographed live. Yeah, I mean, the difference between doing it live and doing it choreographed, I just feel like they're all in the same sort of situation. The amount of effort is still pretty close to the same, whereas, if it's a polished movie that is supplemented or primarily told through the points of view cameras of the characters holding them, you have this cutout, you have this take a breath. I feel a really douchey choice would also be changing the aspect ratio, where you have a standard YouTube or maybe even a vertical aspect ratio when they're holding their phones vertically, and then you take a breath and you cut back to beautiful traditional high resolution widescreen for the storytelling part of it. I don't know how I feel about that. Bad. I do know how I feel about that. I'm not crazy about it, but I do think maybe this is one of the few movies where justifying an aspect ratio change during the movie it's going to be more useful than it is distracting, because it's a good way to clue in the audience something is different. Killer point of view is another way to do that. Night vision is another way to, like, there's other ways to do it, but I think for this, which leads me to the next thing, okay, so before I jump into that, let me just keep going down the list. On the side of just actors holding cameras, we have logic of how the footage was found. Did they edit together? Did they color grade it? One thing that I've noticed about especially travel vlogs is they tend to shoot the way I would shoot. They would shoot in log, and then they would color grade it and edit it to within an inch of its life, if not worse, down the road. So are we going to be seeing that, or are we going to be seeing straight out of camera, where it would almost make more sense to see just how the camera sees it without a log profile, without a color grade, but not in, desaturated log, but like just a regular profile, like a phone profile. I feel like that make more sense, but the only thing I think that would make sense about being the footage found and have it actually look, color graded and good and complete. Like Cloverfield did a lot of jumping around, Blair Witch did a lot of jumping around. I think this movie can use that, but I don't think that it should rely on that. And so to justify having a color grade and having it jumping around but still being actors just holding cameras, did the characters make it all the way to what they thought was the end, and so they edited it, they're about to put it out, and then the last second as it's getting uploaded something bad happens, and maybe that's when we see raw footage that didn't make the something, or maybe the monster makes them go live. while the footage is being uploaded. I think there's something interesting there. I just don't think it's necessarily worth it. Whereas you go to this side of it, instead of having just actors on the cameras, you have a cinematic, framework over it with extra shots that I would be doing. I think you have the classic, the way we've seen horror films do, handy cams and stuff, where you have the narrative be the movie, and then in that scene you can see pop-ins of what would have been the camcorder but is now their cameras, and maybe it doesn't have to be color graded, or maybe it's in just a non-log profile that actually looks like something. I think that's fine. I think that actually makes more sense. It does annoy me to make that choice if they're travel vloggers, because so many travel filmmakers like to do color grading, and so it would make sense intellectually for me to see the footage, if it's raw, be in log footage, desaturated. But for the sake of the narrative, I don't necessarily think that helps anything. I think making it be colored actually makes more sense. Anyway, basically, I think the question that I'm struggling with is, if it's just actors holding cameras, we're aiming towards the authenticity of travel vlogging, travel YouTube, and what that looks like, from their point of view, from their narrative point of view, and also, since they're holding cameras, from their camera's point of view, versus if it's more of a cinematic thing with this extra shooting that I would do. You have this push-pull aesthetic where you have the points of view of the travel vloggers, but you also have the sort of like movie point of view, or the killer point of view, or the monster point of view, that sort of is different. And you have this push-pull where it really does, you can, instead of just leaning in like Cloverfield or Blair Witch, where you're just stuck in this gritty, kind of ugly but very harsh, set of camera work. You have that, but you also have, if you do the cinematic thing, you have the contrast of like a cinematic, well-told, maybe higher production budget situation, which I think that's worth it. I think, despite everything about my brain saying save money, be frugal, be efficient, I think this is the moment where I have to look back at my film school days and be like, maybe all those directors of photography who wanted to spend extra time because they had a nice camera, maybe that works for that moment. That's a weird thing to say out loud. So what I'm basically saying is, I think it makes more sense cinematically to have the cinematic framework of beautiful shots cut together with the real-time shots that the actors will be getting with their own cameras, and that push-pull of the difference between travel YouTube versus actually a movie, because there's differences. A movie takes place when a movie takes place, whereas travel YouTubers like to do golden hour or blue hour, magic hour. They like to shoot a specific time because it's beautiful. But the reality is, if you do that for an entire movie, it's going to take a lifetime to make a movie like that. And so there's very few movies that are actually shot like that. And the more realistic a movie is, the less of a chance you are working in magic hour, because you're working in the hours of the logic of the narrative, if that makes sense. Because most of the day, if you're outside, is not magic hour. Most of the day is, if it's daytime, it's harsh sunlight, bright shadows, it's hot, or it's cold, or it's barren. At night, it's really freaking dark, like annoyingly dark, and the only lights you have are the lights you have, and they don't work super great because you're in the dark, and it's hard to replace the sun when you're in the dark, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm selling myself as I'm saying this out loud. So the question is, if it's just travel vloggers, we're dealing with immersion. If it's not just travel vloggers and it's this additional layer of cinematic, which I've said now 100 times in this video and I'm starting to regret it, it's you have telling a satisfying story. And I think the answer has to always be telling a satisfying story. So basically what I'm saying is, I think it's actually more work to keep chipping away at the travel vlogger stuff to make the travel vlogger stuff palatable and make that a satisfying story, than it is to treat the travel vlogger stuff as exactly what it is, and then make a palatable way of editing, way of storytelling around that. Yeah, with the exception being if we could choreograph and really work on making the palatability of the travel point of view stuff work. I feel like there's a way to do that, but I don't think that's this movie, if that makes sense. I do still like the idea of a live where somebody goes live and it's 90 minutes of incredibly choreographed stuff on Twitch or Kick, or not Kick, but YouTube Live, something entertaining like that. I just don't think that's this story, or at least it's not this specific story. So, yeah. Okay. So I think I've sold myself. I think it's got to be the actors are going to get what they're going to get, and it is what it is. And outside of that, there's going to be this, shot list that over the weekend I will be in the darkness trying to accomplish, with or without the actors being set up for it, because maybe I'm the monster. Part of the logic of the movie is, because it's focused on the 2 or 3 characters, the everything else in the woods is inherently in darkness, which is actually kind of how a film set works anyway, is unless you're an actor on screen at the moment, pretty much everybody else is in darkness or standing behind stuff anyway. So that actually kind of art imitating life a little bit now that I say it out loud. But I just think it's really interesting that, this push and pull of how these travel filmmakers present themselves, or at least how they see themselves. Maybe that's 3 layers. Maybe it's the first one is how they present themselves, because nobody presents themselves purely authentically on camera. It's just, even people that are live the whole time, there's a layer of artifice there, because you don't see them doing, poops, hopefully. So that's the first layer, is, presenting themselves on camera. And then there's how they think they're presenting themselves is the next layer, which is, couple fights and posing for a thing. I mean, the thing that just grinds my gears about travel YouTube specifically, or just vlogging in general, is putting the camera on a fence post, walking or doing whatever all the way back to where you started, and then coming into frame like you just came in for the first time. And having done that before myself, I know that if there's people around, it freaks them out because it's so annoying. I think it's less of a problem in really public spaces like, Manhattan, maybe not Manhattan, but like Hollywood Boulevard. People are used to the filmmaking process where you put a camera down and you step into frame and act like you just went up those stairs for the first time. Although if you're in Hollywood Boulevard, the chances of your camera getting stolen are pretty high. But you get what I'm saying. It's there's an artifice there, and people are going to look at you weird. Whereas, so the first layer is how they present their footage. Second layer is how they think they're presenting their footage. And the third layer is the cinematic overview of all of it, which is where the framework of the story is, which is the monster watching them, for lack of a better word. So I've sold myself on it. I'm going to add a cinematic layer to it. I didn't envision it that way. I definitely envisioned it to be purely stripped down, gritty, found footage only. But now that I think about it, especially if I want to, represent myself as a feature filmmaker, just going out with camcorders and making something and cutting together something, and especially if I'm not the actor in it, which is a lot of ways that another filmmaker could parlay this into something, because I'm not going to be an actor in it, or I'm not going to be a primary actor in it, certainly. Why was I there if I was not, working on making sure the story works? That's what it is. Okay, I solved that riddle, weirdly. Took me a lot less time than I thought. So next time I probably want to jump into the logic of either syncing audio, but I'm actually not so worried about that, especially after a couple weeks ago and I had another problem like that. I think more realistically, it's going to be resources like memory cards and batteries, and how to allocate that. So maybe next time I do one of these, I talk about the logistics of cameras overheating, battery life, memory cards that corrupt sometimes, and how to work around all that without interfering with the actors, because the actors are going to be improvising for this whole thing. So anyway, I don't know, was that helpful? I kind of just blabbed, but at least I feel like I got something done. So catch you next time.